My daughter came home from school with a report card filled with straight A's and a teacher's note saying she was the most gifted student she'd ever taught. But when I went to celebrate with her, I found her crying in her room, saying she couldn't tell me the real reason she was getting such good grades. The silence in that moment was deafening. My 12-year-old daughter, Emma, sat on her bed clutching her report card like it was evidence of a crime. Her eyes were red from crying, and she wouldn't look at me directly. I sat down beside her, trying to keep my voice calm. Emma, what's wrong? These are amazing grades. We should be celebrating. She shook her head violently. You don't understand, Dad. I can't tell you how I'm really getting these grades. My heart stopped. As a single father, I'd worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my wife died in a car accident 2 years ago. Emma's grades had been my one bright spot, the thing that made me feel like I was doing something right. Emma, you can tell me anything. What's going on? She looked at me with those big brown eyes, so much like her mother's, and whispered, Mr. Peterson says if I tell anyone, no one will believe me anyway. Mr. Peterson was her 7th grade English teacher. He'd been teaching at the school for 15 years, was married with 2 kids, and had won Teacher of the Year 3 times. Parents loved him. Kids seemed to respect him. He was the kind of teacher who stayed after school to help struggling students. Tell me what, sweetheart? Emma's voice was barely audible. He said I'm special, that I'm mature for my age. He said if I wanted to keep getting good grades, I needed to spend extra time with him after school. My blood ran cold. What kind of extra time? She couldn't say it. She didn't need to. The way she curled up on herself, the way she flinched when I reached out to comfort her, told me everything I needed to know. I called the school the next morning. I was calm, professional, explained that I had concerns about inappropriate behavior from Mr. Peterson toward my daughter. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, sounded annoyed. Mr. Peterson is one of our most respected teachers. He's been here for 15 years without a single complaint. I'm making a complaint now, I said. Well, we'll look into it, but I have to tell you, Mr. Thompson, Emma's had some behavioral issues this year. She's been seen as attention-seeking since her mother passed. I felt like I'd been punched. Attention-seeking? Sometimes children who've experienced trauma act out in ways that can be misinterpreted. We'll document your concerns, but I wouldn't expect any immediate action. I hung up feeling sick. They thought Emma was lying. They thought she was making up stories for attention. That afternoon, I picked Emma up early from school. She was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. Emma, I want you to know that I believe you, I said. No matter what anyone else says, I believe you. She started crying again. But what if they're right? What if no one else believes me? Then we'll figure it out together. But you did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. Over the next week, I tried everything I could think of. I called the school district's administration office. I was told that without concrete evidence, they couldn't take action against a teacher with such a stellar reputation. I contacted the police. The officer who took my report was kind, but honest. Without physical evidence or witnesses, these cases are extremely difficult to prosecute. And with the victim being a minor who's experienced recent trauma, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I hired a lawyer with money I didn't have. She was sympathetic, but realistic. The school will close ranks around Peterson. They'll question Emma's credibility, bring up her mother's death, suggest she's confused or acting out. It's going to be an uphill battle. Emma's grades started dropping. She became withdrawn, anxious. She'd have panic attacks before school. Some mornings, she'd beg me not to make her go. I started documenting everything. I wrote down every conversation Emma had with me about Peterson. I saved every text message, every email, every voicemail from the school. I took photos of Emma's anxiety symptoms, her sleepless nights, her declining mental health. 3 weeks after my initial complaint, Mrs. Rodriguez called me in for a meeting. I brought my lawyer. We've completed our investigation, she said, not even looking at the file in front of her. Mr. Peterson has categorically denied any inappropriate behavior. Several colleagues have vouched for his character. We found no evidence to support your daughter's claims. So you're doing nothing, I asked. We're recommending that Emma be transferred to a different English class to avoid any confusion, and we strongly suggest she receive counseling to help her process her grief in healthier ways. I felt the rage building in my chest. You're punishing my daughter for reporting abuse. We're not punishing anyone. We're trying to do what's best for Emma. My lawyer leaned forward. What's best for Emma is removing the predator from the classroom. Mrs. Rodriguez's face hardened. I'm going to pretend you didn't just call one of our most respected teachers a predator. This meeting is over. We left the school that day with nothing. Emma would be moved to a different class, but Peterson would continue teaching. He would continue having access to other vulnerable girls. That night, Emma asked me, Dad, why don't they believe me? I didn't have an answer. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes the system protects the wrong people? Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with finding other victims. If Peterson had done this to Emma, he'd done it to others. Predators don't just stop at one victim. I started spending time at the school during pickup, striking up conversations with other parents. I volunteered for school events, hoping to hear something, anything that might give me a lead. It was at the fall carnival that I met Sarah Wilson, another single mother. Her daughter, Chloe, was in 8th grade and had been one of Peterson's students the year before. How did Chloe like having Mr. Peterson? I asked casually while we watched our kids play ring toss. Sarah's face changed. She did really well in his class, got her first A in English all year. Something in her tone made me push a little. He seems like a dedicated teacher. Very dedicated, she said, but there was something cold in her voice. Chloe spent a lot of time after school getting extra help. I felt that familiar chill. Did she ever mention anything unusual about those sessions? Sarah looked at me sharply. Why are you asking? I made a decision, because I think he hurt my daughter. Sarah's face went pale. She grabbed my arm. We need to talk. Not here. We met at a coffee shop the next day. Sarah brought photocopies of text messages, emails, anything that might be relevant. Chloe started getting A's in Peterson's class last year, Sarah said. She'd never been good at English before. I was thrilled. I thought maybe she was finally applying herself. What changed? She started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying, saying she had to go to school, that she couldn't disappoint Mr. Peterson. She became obsessed with perfect attendance. Sarah pulled out her phone. She sent me this text last month, 3 weeks after school started this year. The message read, "Mom, I'm so glad I don't have Peterson this year. I can finally sleep at night." When I asked her what she meant, she broke down. She told me about the after-school sessions, the way he'd touch her shoulder, stand too close, the way he'd tell her she was special, mature, different from other girls. I felt sick. Did you report it? I called the school. They said without concrete evidence, they couldn't do anything. They suggested Chloe was misremembering, that she might be exaggerating normal teacher-student interactions. So he's still teaching, still winning awards, still being praised by parents who don't know what he's really doing. We sat in silence for a moment, then Sarah said, "There have to be others." She was right. Over the next month, we found them. Quietly, carefully, we reached out to other parents, other former students. We found a pattern. Peterson targeted girls who were struggling academically or emotionally, girls who were vulnerable, who needed approval, who wouldn't be believed if they spoke up. He'd offer extra help, make them feel special, then gradually cross boundaries. We found 5 other victims over 3 years. 5 girls who'd been too scared or too ashamed to come forward. 5 families who'd been told their daughters were lying, attention-seeking, confused. With 6 victims and their families, we went back to the school district. This time, we brought media attention. Local news picked up the story. The school district could no longer ignore us. But Peterson was smart. He'd been careful. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses. It was 6 young girls' word against a respected teacher with 15 years of spotless reviews. The district placed Peterson on administrative leave pending investigation. They hired an outside firm to conduct interviews. The firm's report was damning but not conclusive. It found that Peterson had likely engaged in inappropriate behavior but couldn't prove criminal wrongdoing. Peterson was quietly transferred to another school in another district. He received a neutral recommendation. His pension was intact. His reputation, while damaged locally, was salvageable. The school district settled with the families out of court. We received modest compensation and signed non-disclosure agreements. The official story was that Peterson had decided to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Emma started seeing a therapist. She was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety. She'd wake up screaming some nights, reliving the after-school sessions. She became terrified of male teachers, of being alone with adult men. I quit one of my jobs so I could be more available to her. We moved to a different school district, hoping for a fresh start, but the damage was done. Emma's trust in authority figures was shattered. Her confidence was gone. 2 years later, I received a call from Sarah. Peterson had been arrested. A girl at his new school had come forward with concrete evidence, a recording she'd made on her phone during one of their sessions. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. It should have felt like justice, but it didn't. It felt like too little, too late. Emma is 15 now. She's doing better, but she's not the same girl she was before Peterson. She's more cautious, more guarded. She struggles with trust, with authority figures, with self-worth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd done something different, if I'd been more aggressive, more persistent, if I'd gone to the media immediately instead of trying to work within the system. But I also know that the system is designed to protect institutions, not children. Schools will close ranks around accused teachers. They'll question victims' credibility before they'll investigate perpetrators. The other families and I have stayed in touch. We've started a support group for parents dealing with similar situations. We've advocated for policy changes in how schools handle abuse allegations. Emma doesn't know about the support group. She doesn't know about the policy changes or the advocacy work. She's just trying to be a normal teenager, to move past the trauma that shaped her middle school years. Last week, she got an A on an English paper. She showed it to me with genuine pride, not fear. It was the first time in years that a good grade had been something to celebrate, rather than something to be suspicious of. That night, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for believing me, Dad, even when no one else did." I held her tight and promised that I always would. Because sometimes when the system fails, all you have left is love and trust and the determination to keep fighting. The story made headlines in our town. Local teacher convicted of child abuse after years of allegations. But by then, we'd already moved on. We'd already rebuilt our lives around the reality that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect children are the ones who hurt them most. Emma still has nightmares sometimes. She still struggles with anxiety, but she's also strong, resilient, and fiercely protective of other kids who might be going through what she went through. She wants to be a social worker when she grows up. She wants to be the advocate she never had, the adult who believes children when they find the courage to speak up. I'm proud of her. I'm proud of the woman she's becoming despite everything she's been through, and I'm grateful that she trusted me enough to tell me the truth, even when it was the hardest thing she'd ever had to do. The system failed Emma. The school failed her, but she didn't fail herself. She found her voice and she used it to protect other children from the same fate. 6 months after Peterson's conviction, I got a call from a detective in another state. Peterson had been teaching there for 8 years before coming to our district. 3 more victims had come forward, emboldened by the news coverage of his arrest. "Mr. Thompson," the detective said, "we're building a case against Peterson for what he did here. Would you and Emma be willing to testify?" I looked at Emma, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. She'd been making real progress in therapy. She was laughing again, had made new friends at her new school. "I'll ask her," I said. That evening, I sat Emma down and explained about the other victims. Her face went through a range of emotions: pain, anger, and then something I hadn't seen in years: determination. "I want to help them," she said. "I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Emma would have to testify about what Peterson had done to her. She'd have to face cross-examination from defense attorneys who would try to discredit her story. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked her. She nodded. "Other girls need to know they're not alone. They need to know that someone believes them." We spent months preparing. Emma worked with a victim's advocate, practicing her testimony, learning how to handle difficult questions. She was nervous but resolute. The day of the trial, Emma wore a blue dress, her mother's favorite color. She held my hand as we walked into the courthouse. "Remember," I whispered, "just tell the truth. That's all you have to do." Emma's testimony was devastating. She spoke clearly, calmly, about what Peterson had done to her. She described the after-school sessions, the inappropriate touching, the way he'd made her feel special, and then exploited that trust. The defense attorney was aggressive, trying to poke holes in her story. "Isn't it true that you were struggling with your mother's death, that you were seeing a counselor for behavioral issues?" "Yes," Emma said, "but that doesn't mean I made this up. Couldn't you have misinterpreted normal teacher-student interactions?" Emma looked directly at the attorney. "I know the difference between help with homework and being touched inappropriately." The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney seemed taken aback by her composure. Peterson was convicted on 12 counts of child sexual abuse. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The judge said that the courage of the young victims had prevented countless other children from being hurt. After the trial, Emma and I were approached by a reporter from a national news magazine. She wanted to write a story about how we'd fought to expose Peterson. "I think it's important," Emma said. "Maybe other families will read it and know they're not alone." The article, titled "When the System Fails, One Father's Fight to Protect His Daughter," was published 6 months later. It sparked a national conversation about how schools handle abuse allegations. Emma was featured on the cover, her face partially shadowed to protect her identity. The headline read, "She Found Her Voice." The response was overwhelming. We received hundreds of letters from other families who'd gone through similar experiences. Many shared stories of being ignored, dismissed, or blamed when they tried to report abuse. Emma decided to start a blog called Voices of Survivors. She wrote about her experience, offered advice to other young victims, and created a space where they could share their stories safely. The blog gained thousands of followers. Emma was invited to speak at conferences about child protection. She testified before state legislatures about improving mandatory reporting laws. At 17, Emma received a scholarship to study social work in college. Her essay about overcoming trauma and advocating for other victims moved the selection committee to tears. "I want to be the adult I needed when I was 12, she wrote. "I want to be the person who listens, who believes, who fights for children who can't fight for themselves." Emma's story inspired changes in our state's education laws. Schools are now required to have independent oversight for abuse allegations. Teachers can no longer be quietly transferred after credible accusations. The law is called Emma's Law. At the signing ceremony, the governor said, "Sometimes it takes the courage of one child to change the system for everyone." Emma stood next to me at the ceremony, now 18 and about to start college. She'd grown into a confident, compassionate young woman who'd turned her trauma into purpose. "I'm proud of you," I whispered, as we watched the governor sign the bill. "I'm proud of us," she replied. "We never gave up." Peterson died in prison 2 years into his sentence. Another inmate, who had children of his own, killed him in what was ruled a prison fight. Emma didn't celebrate his death, but she said she felt a sense of closure. "Justice isn't always about punishment," she told me. "Sometimes it's about making sure the same thing doesn't happen to other kids." Emma graduated summa cum laude with a degree in social work. She was hired by the State Child Protection Agency before she even finished her internship. On her first day of work, she called me from her office. "Dad, I just wanted to thank you again for believing me, for fighting for me when no one else would." "You saved yourself, Emma," I said. "I just stood by you while you did it." Today, Emma runs a nonprofit organization that provides support to children who've been abused by trusted adults. She's written a book about her experience called Finding My Voice, A Survivor's Guide to Healing. She's married now to a wonderful man who understands her history and supports her work. They're talking about having children of their own. "I want to be the kind of parent you were," she told me recently. "Someone who listens, who believes, who never gives up." Emma's story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. The trauma she experienced will always be part of her, but she's taken that pain and transformed it into something powerful. She's saved countless other children from experiencing what she went through. She's changed laws, policies, and most importantly, she's changed how we listen to children when they find the courage to speak. speak up. Sometimes I think about that day when she came home with straight A's, crying in her room. I think about how different things might have been if I hadn't believed her, if I'd dismissed her concerns as grief-related behavioral issues. But I did believe her, and that made all the difference. Emma's voice, once silenced by fear and shame, now speaks for children everywhere. She's proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth. The system that failed her as a child now works to protect others because of her advocacy. The teacher who hurt her can never hurt another child. The silence that once protected predators has been broken. That's not just justice. That's transformation, and sometimes that's everything. Years later, when Emma's own daughter turned 12, she came to me with concerns. Not about abuse, but about how to talk to her daughter about staying safe, about trusting her instincts, about knowing the difference between appropriate and inappropriate adult behavior. I want to protect her, Emma said, but I also want her to trust adults and not be afraid of the world. We sat in my kitchen, the same one where Emma had first told me about Peterson. Now she was a mother herself, trying to navigate the balance between protection and freedom. You'll do what I did, I told her. You'll listen, you'll believe her, and you'll fight for her if you need to. Emma's daughter, Sarah, named after her grandmother, is now 15. She's confident, outspoken, and unafraid to speak up when something doesn't feel right. She volunteers at her mother's nonprofit, helping other young survivors find their voices. Grandpa, she told me last week, I'm proud of what you and Mom did. You changed things for kids like me. Emma's organization has grown into a national movement. They've helped pass legislation in 12 states requiring independent oversight of abuse allegations in schools. They've trained thousands of teachers, administrators, and parents to recognize warning signs. But the work isn't finished. Every week, Emma receives calls from families dealing with similar situations. Some are believed and supported. Others face the same uphill battle we did. The system is better, Emma told me recently, but it's not perfect. There are still too many children who aren't believed, too many predators who are protected by institutions. Last month, Emma testified before Congress about a federal bill that would standardize how schools handle abuse allegations. She spoke about her own experience, about the importance of believing children, about the long-term damage that occurs when victims are silenced. I was one of the lucky ones, she said. I had a father who believed me and fought for me. Not every child has that. That's why we need systemic change. The bill passed the House by a wide margin. It's now in the Senate, where Emma continues to advocate for its passage. Emma's story has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and academic research. She's become a leading voice in the movement to protect children from institutional abuse. But she's never forgotten where it all started. Every year on the anniversary of Peterson's conviction, she visits the courthouse where she testified. I go there to remember, she told me. To remember that speaking up, even when it's hard, can change everything. Emma's voice, once silenced by fear and shame, now echoes in legislative chambers, conference rooms, and courtrooms across the country. She's living proof that survivors can become advocates, that victims can become victors. The teacher who tried to silence her gave her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that her voice matters, that speaking truth to power, even when you're young and afraid, can move mountains. Peterson is gone, but his legacy lives on in the laws that now protect children, in the training that prevents abuse, in the voices of survivors who refuse to be silenced. Emma's daughter will grow up in a world that's safer because of her mother's courage. She'll know that adults who care about her will believe her, support her, and fight for her. That's the real victory. Not just justice for Emma, but protection for countless other children who will never know Peterson's name, but will benefit from the changes his conviction brought about. Sometimes I think about that moment when Emma first told me about Peterson, how different things might have been if I'd reacted differently, if I'd doubted her, if I'd given up when the system failed us. But I didn't. And because I didn't, Emma found her voice. And because Emma found her voice, thousands of other children have found theirs. The system that once protected predators now protects children. The silence that once enabled abuse has been broken. The shame that once belonged to victims now belongs to those who hurt them. That's not just justice. That's transformation, and sometimes that's everything. The story continues in legislative chambers, in therapy offices, in classrooms where children learn that their voices matter. It continues in the work Emma does every day, in the lives she touches, in the children she protects. Emma's voice, once small and afraid, now speaks for millions. She's proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, and sometimes that's enough to change the world. 5 years ago, I received a letter that changed everything I thought I knew about our victory. It was from a woman named Jessica Martinez, a teacher in California who had been following Emma's story since the beginning. Mr. Thompson, she wrote, I need to tell you something about Peterson that never came out during the trial, something that might help you understand how deep this really went. Jessica had worked at the school district where Peterson taught before coming to us. She'd been a first-year teacher then, young and idealistic, and she'd noticed things that made her uncomfortable. Peterson had a system, she explained when we spoke on the phone. He'd identify vulnerable girls early in the year. He'd study their home situations, their academic struggles, their social dynamics. He kept files. My blood went cold. What kind of files? Detailed notes about each girl's vulnerabilities. Emma's file mentioned her mother's death, your work schedule, her need for approval. He'd been planning to target her from the first day of school. Jessica Jessica had tried to report her concerns back then, but she was told she was being paranoid. When she persisted, she was quietly transferred to another school. Her teaching career was derailed because she tried to protect children. "I've carried this guilt for years," she said. "I should have done more. I should have found a way to stop him." I shared this information with Emma, who was shaken but not surprised. "It makes sense," she said. "He knew exactly what to say to make me trust him. He knew exactly how to manipulate me." This revelation led to a deeper investigation. Jessica's testimony helped prosecutors in 3 other states build cases against Peterson for crimes that went back decades. The scope of his abuse was staggering. Emma testified in 2 more trials, helping convict Peterson on additional charges. Each time she was stronger, more confident, more determined to see justice done. "Every time I testify," she told me, "I'm speaking for all the girls who can't speak for themselves, the ones who didn't survive, who didn't get the support they needed." The additional convictions brought Peterson's total sentence to life in prison. He would never be eligible for parole. He would never hurt another child. But more importantly, the investigation revealed how predators operate within institutional systems. Peterson hadn't been a lone wolf. He'd been part of a network of enabling behaviors that allowed abuse to flourish. Emma's advocacy work expanded to address these systemic issues. She began working with law enforcement to train officers on how to properly investigate institutional abuse. She consulted with school districts on creating transparent reporting systems. "It's not enough to catch the predators," she explained to me. "We have to dismantle the systems that protect them." Emma's work attracted international attention. She was invited to speak at conferences in Europe, Australia, and Canada about child protection policies. Her model for institutional oversight was being adopted in countries around the world, but the cost of this work was enormous. Emma suffered from chronic PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The constant retelling of her story, the exposure to other victims' trauma, the pressure of being a public figure, it all took a toll. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm stuck in the past," she confided to me during one of our weekly dinners. "If I'm defining my entire life by what happened to me when I was 12. I reminded her of something she'd told me years earlier. "You're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by what you did about it." Emma decided to step back from the most public aspects of her advocacy work. She continued running her nonprofit, but she focused more on direct service to victims and less on media appearances. "I want to heal," she said. "I want to live a life that's about more than just surviving trauma." Emma threw herself into her personal life. She and her husband adopted a son from foster care, a boy who had experienced his own trauma. They created a loving, stable home where healing was possible. "I want him to know that adults can be trusted," Emma told me as we watched her son play in the backyard. "I want him to have the childhood I lost." But Emma's influence continued to grow, even as she stepped back from the spotlight. The laws she'd helped pass were preventing abuse. The training programs she'd developed were saving children. The survivors she'd supported were becoming advocates themselves. One day, I received a call from a young woman named Maria. She'd been abused by a coach at her high school. She'd seen Emma's story online and found the courage to report the abuse. "Because of Emma, I knew I would be believed," Maria said. "Because of Emma, I knew I wasn't alone." Maria's case led to the coach's conviction and the implementation of new safety protocols in youth sports. She credited Emma's advocacy with giving her the strength to fight for justice. Stories like Maria's arrived regularly. A boy in Texas who reported abuse by a youth pastor, a girl in Florida who spoke up about a predatory teacher, a teenager in Oregon who escaped a dangerous situation because she recognized the warning signs Emma had taught her to watch for. "You know what's amazing?" Emma said to me recently. "I don't even meet most of these kids, but somehow my story reaches them. It gives them permission to speak up." Emma's granddaughter, now 5 years old, doesn't know the details of her grandmother's story, but she's growing up in a world that's safer because of Emma's courage. "When she's old enough," Emma said, "I'll tell her why her voice matters. I'll tell her that speaking up, even when it's scary, can change everything." Last month, Emma received a letter from a high school student in Japan. The girl had read Emma's book, translated into Japanese, and had found the courage to report abuse by a family member. "Your words traveled across the ocean to help me," the girl wrote. "You saved my life." Emma cried when she read that letter, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her childhood trauma had been transformed into something that could heal others. "I used to think Peterson stole my childhood," she told me. "Now I realize he gave me a purpose. He gave me a reason to fight for other children." Emma's voice, once silenced by fear and shame, now echoes in languages she doesn't speak, in countries she's never visited, in the hearts of children she'll never meet. The teacher who tried to destroy her gave her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that her voice has the power to change the world. And sometimes that's not just enough. Sometimes that's everything.